If it's okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, that's quite the announcement that person had there. I'm just going to pull up a PowerPoint if that's okay, because where I'm coming from is on the PowerPoint. So just want to do that. So hi, everybody. So nice to meet all of you. I'm in Canada, so pretty close to Justine, actually, although Nebraska's, I guess, halfway across the country from where I am. I'm just near Niagara Falls. So just wanted to begin in Canada. What we do is at the beginning of our meetings, we acknowledge the traditional territories on which we're meeting and the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded and cared for this land, for millennia. And I think, for us at Tamarack, we have been on a journey of really understanding Indigenous history in Canada and the impact of colonialism on Indigenous peoples. And so it's in many ways a very tragic history, and one that, certainly there are elements of it that continue today. And so we want to acknowledge that as a settler, we've contributed to that tragic history. And so this is all part of our truth and reconciliation process. So I'll tell you a little bit about Tamarack, which is the organization that I work for, and lots of you know about. So that's kind of cool, actually. So Tamarack's been around for about 20 years. We're a charitable organization. Our partner organization is in New Zealand, Inspiring Communities. We have partnered with them from the very beginning, I think, of our history, and share resources and knowledge back and forth. I started my work at Tamarack in the vibrant communities area. So I was part of a local community effort in my hometown of Hamilton, which was really focused on reducing poverty. And that work continues. I did that work for a couple of years and then moved to Tamarack and led the Vibrant Communities Ending Poverty Initiative for a bit of time, and then moved over to the Learning Center. And so Tamarack's a place where we are supporting communities with their practice, so collaborative roundtables in more than 400 communities across Canada and the United States under the banner of what we call Vibrant Communities. And there are 4 areas of focus with Vibrant Communities. So the work that we do, that communities are engaged in reducing and ending poverty. Deepening community is all about neighbors and neighborhood development and asset-based community development. So that's the deepening community work. We're in 20 communities now, small, medium, and Indigenous communities around building youth futures. And that's really focused on youth-led and ally-supported work to support young people in their transition, through high school to post-secondary education, employment, and training. And most recently, we've launched an initiative called Climate Transitions. And the intent of Climate Transitions is really to engage citizens in the conversation around climate and climate change and climate impact. Because in Canada, I don't know if this is true in New Zealand, but often those conversations happen within the municipal sphere or in the corporate sphere, but they don't necessarily include citizens. And so part of the Climate Transitions work is to build collective impact approaches so that it's a whole of community approach to climate transitions. So that's Vibrant Communities. And then the Learning Center is where I sit at Tamarack right now. And the aim of the Learning Center is to take all the wisdom and knowledge generated from all our community partners, but also look at the field of practice and try to advance the field of practice in 5 kind of interconnected ways. So we focus on collective impact, community engagement, collaborative leadership, bringing social innovation tools into community work. And Justine, for you, we also think about evaluating impact and thinking about contribution and attribution and all those kinds of things. Tamarack, for those of you that have never visited our website, we have like a repository of a ton of resources. It's sometimes really difficult to navigate, but feel free to come to the website. And we believe in the principle of R&D, which is rip off and duplicate, right? So access anything you want on our website and use it for your own purposes. Hey, so I'm going to talk I don't have a lot, because I think when Denise and I were chatting, we were chatting about the opportunity to engage more in conversation about collective impact, but I'm going to just set the table and then we'll go into a conversation about, the work you're doing, if you're doing work in collective impact, the questions you might have if you don't know a lot about the framework. My experiences at Tamarack are pretty deep. Not only did I work in Hamilton leading as a part of the staff team, a collective impact initiative, but I've done tons of consulting with communities and continue to do that even today with communities across Canada, the US, worldwide around collective impact. And I'm particularly interested in collaborative governance as it relates to collective impact. So happy to riff on about that. So at Tamarack, when we think about collective impact, the collective impact as a framework is a framework that is best suited if you're trying to move systems, if you're trying to shift or influence systems. And the framework has 2 kind of core elements to it. It has the preconditions of collective impact and the conditions of collective impact. When we looked at the framework, though, we said, that's not quite enough, given our experience and our, learning from our colleagues, Denise and her colleagues at Inspiring Communities. They said, yeah, you got to know a little bit more about your community. You can't just plunk a model into the community without understanding the context of the community. So these are almost preconditions to collective impact. And we've written about these at Tamarack. So we wrote an article a number of years ago called Collective Impact 3.0, which was kind of the evolution of collective impact, how we saw it based on what we were learning with our communities ending poverty and the work we were doing in deepening communities in Canada, and what we were observing as well as collective impact was rolling out, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully, right? So we kind of stood back. So these are the preconditions. So one is community readiness. And it is, we're seeing in larger communities a ton of collaborative work happening in different spheres and with different kind of perspectives. And in some communities in Canada, there are multiple collective impact efforts working at the same time. And what we're seeing created is these siloed efforts, right? And so communities that are working in silos, whether they're organizational silos or collaborative silos or collective impact silos, probably aren't ready. There's probably something that is hindering their readiness to really get to scale. And so we think a lot at Tamarack about, how ready is this community to take on systems change work, or do they need more support in the kind of getting better at collaboration, getting better at community-led development? What is the real thing that community needs? And then how do we fit the purpose to that? So not every community and not everything that we're working on needs to be collective impact. So I think that's one of the things that we've realized. And focusing on community readiness is a critical first step, is to say, okay, so what's going on in this community? What are the enabling factors of readiness, and what are some of the things that are kind of might be disabling from a readiness perspective? The second thing that we think about is the context. So context is, is there a network of leaders who are willing to step up to the plate? Does the leadership in the community, is it cohesive and, wanting to work together properly, or is there acrimony, or did they just come from, a collective effort that failed dramatically, and there's still lots of hurt feelings? So what's the context? And context is also, what's the narrative of that community? So what are the stories that we're telling each other about our community, and to what degree can that narrative be leveraged? So all of those things are contextual, and they're very important when you're trying to scale change in a community, because if you don't know what the narrative is, you're not going to be able to change the narrative, right? And every community has a narrative. And so it's about listening to the folks in the community, listening to what they're telling, the stories they're telling each other. Some communities, Waterloo region, for example, if anybody knows anything about Ontario, Waterloo region has 2 universities. I don't know if you know about BlackBerry phones, but they used to be really popular. But it's a place where BlackBerries were made, and there's a high tech. So the narrative of the Waterloo region is a really positive, we are the most innovative, we are the most creative, we're the most dynamic kind of community. They maybe aren't, but that they're very proud. And so you can leverage that if you're moving it forward. Whereas the community that I live in, Hamilton, was a steel town and a manufacturing town, and the bottom fell out of the manufacturing industry, right? So there's lots of economic challenges. And so we're dirt under your fingernails, go to work with a steel lunch bucket and a hard helmet. So there's two totally different narratives there. And so really thinking about the change you're trying to assemble you can leverage the community narrative in that way. Complexity. So complexity of the issue. So we really have thought about complexity from the perspective of problems having multiple dimensions of complexity, right? So there are simple parts of a problem, there are complicated or technical parts of a problem, there are complex parts of a problem, and sometimes there are chaotic parts of a problem. And so really understanding the thing that you're trying to work on together, where it fits in that complexity framework, I think is helpful. So how complex is the issue? More complex issues are better suited to a collective impact approach. And then the final thing that we think about from a precondition perspective is collective impact even the right strategy for us? Because, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can coordinate your community, and it doesn't always have to be collective impact. Sometimes it's asset-based community development. Sometimes it's community-led development. Sometimes it might be collaboration. Sometimes it might be network development. Sometimes it might be consensus building. Sometimes it might be collective impact. So there's a range, and you don't necessarily always have to pick collective impact. But if you're trying to move systems and influence systems, collective impact can be helpful in that way. So we would say, hey, before you dive in, think about these things. That's kind of the Tamarack approach to collective impact. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the framework. And it was 2011 when John Kania and Mark Kramer first published that article about collective impact in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And in that first article called Collective Impact, they kind of lit a match under a lot of communities, particularly in the US. I think other countries were maybe a little bit slower to come on board because it didn't suit their context or the way that they were organizing, or there's lots of reasons why. And I think some people, when they saw that article, that initial article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, they probably said, hey, this is already how we're organizing. But they're not recognizing the work that we're doing. And so there was some pushback, there was some kind of interest in it. I think what's interesting about that original article is that John and John Kania and Mark Kramer, they gave you the framework, but they didn't tell you exactly how to implement, right? And so that also was a little bit of a challenge because people are looking often for recipes, and what they provided was a set of principles for how to act. And so that's a little bit of the nuance in the framework that I think is kind of interesting to consider. So the initial definition of collective impact is this kind of cross-sector approach. The idea was that you would bring different sectors in the community together to try to tackle this complex problem that the community was facing. And there's a range of those kind of complex problems, right? Homelessness in some communities, poverty in others, creating the conditions for mental health and well-being in other communities. So we've really seen collective impact efforts kind of cross the spectrum of complex problems across a whole range of communities, sometimes really working well, sometimes not so well. The initial framework had 3 preconditions. And so Kania and Kramer said, hey, if you're going to do this work, you need to engage influential champions. And so some people interpret influential champions as, the mayor and the business leader and all that those kinds of things. And they do that at their own peril, because actually influential champions can be neighborhood leaders, they can be indigenous leaders, they can be community leaders. The influential champions have spheres of influence, and it's not in one domain or another domain. It's across all domains, and depending on the issue that you're bringing folks around the table around, you really want to think about who are the folks with spheres of influence that will be most helpful to get us traction on this issue. That's a better way of framing it. So almost the word influential and champions, I think sometimes is not as well represented as it could be. Urgency, though, I think is a really good precondition. And urgency, when you talk about these kinds of complex problems, certainly the folks who are close to the problem or have lived in living experience know about the urgency, but sometimes other people in the community don't see that level of urgency. So this is true for when we began to work on ending poverty in Hamilton. Certainly the folks living in poverty in our community knew about the urgency, but when we tried to talk to our mayor or to business leaders, they would say, no, it's about economic development or prosperity, or they would use other language. And so we had to build the case around urgency and tie that case into, the challenges that the community was really facing. So urgency often is identified through data and through other sources, but urgency can also be what people are talking about on Twitter, on social media, in the media, what's in the priority for government and elected officials. So urgency can be represented in a whole bunch of ways, and you just got to pay attention to that. And then adequate resources is really, do you have the right amount? If you're going to tackle a complex issue, it's going to take time, it's going to take human resources, and it's going to take financial resources. And can you bring those resources together in a purposeful way? And that's what adequate resources are. So those are the preconditions. And then the actual framework, the actual collective impact framework, in some ways is pretty simple, right? It's got 5 core conditions. One is that the folks around the table agree to a common agenda. And I don't know if you guys, who's a famous filmmaker in New Zealand, Denise?
The first person that comes to mind is Taika Waititi.
Okay.
There's also Jane Campion.
Yeah, so, you know, when we talk about collective impact in the North American context, we talk about Francis Ford Coppola. And he was once asked, what's the difference between a good movie and a bad movie? And Francis Ford Coppola would say, well, a good movie is when everybody's making the same movie, right? And that's really what a common agenda is. You're getting everybody to make the same movie, right? So there's diverse voices, but they're coming together and agreeing together on what they want to work on together. It's often grounded in a community aspiration, and it is responsive. So while you say, okay, this work is about shifting the needle on poverty, we're also going to be agile and responsive to opportunities as they appear, right? So it's not just doing one bit, it's kind of being in tune with your community. Shared measurement, that's the second condition of collective impact, and it's really tied to that urgency question, right? So shared measurement is really thinking about, okay, so what are the things that how will we know we're making a difference? How do we know we're making an impact? And shared measurement is about trying to understand that. So it's about exploring, it's about alignment with the common agenda, it's about tracking progress, it's about sharing your results with the broader community and using that as leverage to build momentum and to build even further capacity. And what's interesting about shared measurement, particularly, you know, what we've learned in Canada is the attribution versus contribution conundrum, right? So in Canada, Tamarack has been working for 20 years around the complex issue of ending poverty in Canada, and we just had our most recent statistics. And when we started this work 20 years ago, the poverty rate in Canada was around 15%, and it had been at, you know, between 12 and 15%, despite good times and bad economic times. It kind of always sat around that number, right? Well, our most recent Statistics Canada reported that poverty was at 6.9%. Pretty substantial decrease in poverty, pretty amazing results. Tamarack has contributed to it, but we are not the sole contributors. There are many, 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 many people that are on the journey with us. So, you know, shared measurement, but also recognizing kind of that contribution, how you're contributing and how others are also contributing, because there are many players in the ending poverty space in Canada. Mutually reinforcing activities. I said it'd only be a few minutes and now I'm going on forever. So I won't go that much longer, but mutually reinforcing activities. I love this condition. This is my favorite condition. And it is the most obscure condition of them all. So, because mutually reinforcing activities is really about taking all the things that are already going on in the community that are aligned with the work that you're doing and kind of trying to get those boats rowing in the same direction, right? And leveraging where you can. You know, communities have a ton of resources, but not necessarily shared resources or joined up resources. And mutually reinforcing activities is all about that, right? And then not only do you start to get the boats rowing in the same direction so they can travel from island to island, or you know, whatever that metaphor is, but then you want to say, oh, okay, we're going to hit some really rough water. Maybe these boats have to come even closer together or whatever. So it's about also making choices to really begin to scale the work. Continuous communications. I would say this one, if I was being critical, yes, continuous communications, but what it doesn't talk about is about that engagement and the deep engagement of folks with different perspectives and bringing in lived and living experience into the conversation. So there are things like trust, transparency, and engagement, but you might not necessarily say, okay, what does that look like on the ground? Yes, we need to be communicating because we have different perspectives, but how do we ensure that all those perspectives are able and feel like they have an equitable voice around the table and are able to bring their voice and have the confidence and create the safe spaces for the really difficult conversations that sometimes have to happen in a community when you're tackling a complex issue. And then finally, backbone. So it used to be called backbone infrastructure, and then it became backbone support. And at Tamarack, we say it's more the container of resources to enable collective impact work to happen. So we've evolved that idea. But the notion of backbone and or container is that, you know, so often collaboration happens from the corner of our desks. And if we really aim to scale population level change, we need to put the adequate resources behind it to be able to do that effectively. So that's really thinking about backbone. The other thing I think about when I think about backbone, and not a lot of folks do, is that, you know, I used to say in Hamilton, because we had 40 people around our leadership table, right? You know, I used to say, you can't rely only on the staff component. You can't even just rely on the 40 and the staff, right? That will never solve poverty, you know, despite all their best efforts and all their best intentions. It's really when you turn outward to the community and you have these circles of engagement and really welcome the whole community in and give them the opportunity to contribute. That's really movement building, and it's really about, you know, creating more and more backbone support and enabling all of that. So that's where I'm going to stop. I'm just going to tell you one more thing. So most recently, Tamarack, so we've been in this work for 20 years, and we have a ton of tools that we love and we use over and over again. And some of them we've brought forward from our partners in inspiring communities and other places. So we wove those all together in a toolkit. And the toolkit is really set up in a way that if you go onto the site, you can say, hey, I'm really interested in shared measurement. What are the tools? What are the resources? What are the papers that are related to that? Or in, you know, continuous communication or mutually reinforcing activities. And so we invite you. It's an open source toolkit. And we also have an ebook. So if you don't want to navigate the toolkit, you can go to the ebook, and here's the link. And I think when we first launched it, like, yeah, lots of people signed up and lots of people find it a really helpful resource. And if there's a tool you really love, let us know, and we'll, we're probably going to do a toolkit 2.0, maybe not this year because it took us 3 years to get the toolkit out, but maybe in a year or so. So that is it, and I will stop sharing, and maybe what we can do is engage and learn about other people's collective impact experiences. Over to you, Denise.
Well, that sounds pretty wonderful to me. What are other people's collective impact experiences? What are the questions that are coming up, or the thoughts, or the things you want to share?
We see Tony, your grandchild has joined you. So
yeah, yeah, I'm trying for a collective impact with her, but she refused to do it, Liz. She woke.
Yeah.
Or as we say, she's very woke.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Thank you for that. That was excellent. I tell you what we tried to do. That was in terms of New Zealand. We a group of us had a community collective that looked at the Treaty of Waitangi. So in Hamilton we had was called the Pakeha Waitangi Group, PWG, that's what it was. And we did things like hand out pamphlets in town, and that wasn't awfully popular. This is back in the 1990s, really, so it's a wee while ago. Are you talking? And then we walked what's called the Okati line, which is the confiscation line, where in Waikato, which is where we live, they took quite a lot of the land, from the local Maori tribes. And that was kind of interesting in terms of impact. I don't know that we had much of that. The only thing we did do that was certainly impactful is that a local Maori group were objecting to people going in and mining iron sands where they had urupara, burial grounds. And excuse me, what? I apologise for my granddaughter. And they said what they wanted was a windmill to provide power to the protest, so they could power their Apple Macintoshes, you see. And that was why we decided that under what's called Tino Rangatiratanga, which is allowing chieftainship to the local First Nations people, we would provide this windmill. So we got a windmill. Someone was, in this case, a bit silly, but they mortgaged their house. They had the windmill built. We did, and we paid the guy's mortgage off for it. And they all, the Maori group protested against the iron sand mining group. Well, that was all very well, except that the local Maori Queen objected to it. So we were supporting a group that wasn't supported by their own people. It doesn't always work too well, is all I can say.
That's
one of the tricky.
Thank you for that, Tony. I mean, I think that's one of those context questions, right? Is, how many folks will be in support? Do you have those influential champions on board? What are the context things that are going on, right? Yeah, so those preconditions are so important. And sometimes, what we see is communities just forge ahead without thinking about those things. Yeah, really interesting.
And it's that shared agenda, that agility you talked about too, right? Because sometimes we do need to forge ahead, because you do lots of talking and thinking and not a lot of doing, and people drop off too. I wonder if anyone's had any thoughts or experiences from that side of things.
Yes, we have a little bit in our Collective Impact project, Liz and Denise. We started actually back in as far back as 2012. So when the first framework was put out there, our local community and service providers were onto it really quickly. But it's taken an awful long time to get there, and there has been people drop off along the way. But the bonus is we've also had other people join us, and it's just been a cycle, if you like, people moving in and people moving out. But we actually only established our governance structure in 2020, and our working group structure at the end of that same year. So in effect, the work on the ground has been going since then, but the lead up to it, which was the establishing the community readiness and the establishing the support or the understanding what the complexity of the issues were, started back in 2012. So there was 8 years of prior work that went on. One of the things that's been really terrific for us is that we have had some serious high-level community leaders who have been with us all the way through the project. That's been really valuable. We haven't had that experience that you mentioned, Liz, in the case of your mayor. However, we have now got a situation where we've got a very solid and connected governance group. We have people wanting to join that governance group, and people currently on there not wanting to leave. So we're coming to a...
Oops.
We might have lost you there, Kylie, but that sounds like a good situation to be in. I'm really grateful for people putting their hands up, and I think, Alex, you were next. Do you want to follow on from Kylie? Oh, might have lost Alex as well. Just had a whole lot of loss.
Sorry,
No,
I dropped out. Sorry, I dropped out. I'm not sure what was the last word you heard from me, but that's probably enough anyway.
So you're just
Awesome.
talking about having more people on your governance group and how you're having to make the decision about how to navigate that.
Yes, because we've had a core group, which has been the inaugural group for the last 2 years, but it's taken until very recently for that group to have a really strong and shared sense of the issues and problems, and they've really only come to that in the last couple of months. And so now it's a 2-year term, and now according to their terms of reference. So our challenge is, if people want to stay on, you know, having to keep that connection that they've made and their commitment to the issues and the problems. And we're just struggling. It's not a struggle, but we're just grappling with how to manage that now when we've also got other people who want to be involved at that level. It's an interesting challenge to have, you know. For some people it's quite the opposite, so we shouldn't complain. The other thing that we're doing and working really hard on is that our commitment is to have 50% of our entire collective impact membership as community members. The remaining 50% is represented by services, government agencies and that level. We've reached, in just over the 18 months since we started, we've reached 25%.
Oh,
so
great.
we're on the road. We're on the road. And Alan, my colleague who's also on here, he leads one of those working groups, and his group has the most community members attached to it. So we're pretty happy with that.
One really great tool that we use a lot if you're experiencing change in your collective impact, who's involved and things like that, it's called a key milestone report, right? And a key milestone report is it's not a big report. It might be 3 pages, 3 or 4 pages, but it actually tracks the key decisions that your collaborative has made over time, so that when, you know, a new member comes on board, you can orient them and onboard them really quickly. So you can say, because often new members are great, but they will sometimes take you backwards before moving forward. So a key milestone report gives that orientation, but also helps you all continue your path forward.
Great tool. I could do with that. We're onboarding some new trustees next week, so I'll have a look for that myself. Alex, I was asking you, would you like to tell us what you're thinking?
Yeah, so I found that fascinating, Liz, and I've got heaps of questions, and I'll try and limit it, you know, to a few. So I'm working at the moment on the PMP Peter McKenzie project, which is a poverty project, so $17 million to spend down over the next 10 years. And we've got 8 kaikoura or groups that we fund, and we're funding long term because we know that this funding has to last for a while. I'm the researcher and evaluator for it, and we're moving to a sort of a participatory philanthropy approach, so bringing the groups on boards to make the decisions. The interesting thing for me is, firstly, how we defined community, because we've kind of looked at it as a New Zealand-wide project, and so there are different groups working on different parts. And Canada, when you talk about Canada, you talk about the reduction in poverty in Canada, which is, you know, is that the community that we're talking about here? And I guess the really tricky part that we have is there is massive buy-in by each of the groups who are working on different parts. There's a massive buy-in to the vision of the Peter McKenzie project. But in terms, and we meet regularly, but in terms of shared action, they're all so busy working on housing or on this or this or this, that the interest on the shared part of the work is massive at the time that we meet, and very and drops off on the day-to-day, really doing incredible work, incredible work, but not really in that sort of shared agenda. And I guess I'm wondering how you guys have done it, because I'm really struggling as the evaluator to understand how to progress this in a way that we could really leverage more collective action, I guess, and be a stronger combined voice? That's just the point.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We define community as community, and sometimes it can be a single city. Sometimes it can be a regional entity, because in Canada, there's all sorts of mixes. Sometimes it's rural, sometimes it's urban, sometimes it's Indigenous. It has all sorts of different perspectives to it. But community is often defined by geographic boundaries, particularly when you're working from the ending poverty perspective. What we've learned is that, you know, across the 300 communities that we support in the ending poverty work, there are 8 areas that there are 8 strategies that are common across them, right? So one community might be working on accessible transportation and education, another community affordable education, another community might be housing and homelessness, and another one might be income security, right? So we're allowing for local variation, but we've seen the 8 themes, right? So the 8 themes are really what Tamarack tries to move, you know, collectively and report collectively on. And luckily, you know, when our Canadian government decided to more intentionally a number of years ago invest in poverty reduction, they did a big consultation across Canada around that, and many of our communities informed that process. So those 8 themes rolled up into the federal poverty reduction strategy. So we know we have local variation, like you just said you do, Alex, but the theming, the identification of core themes is really what we're looking at. And then what we've done with communities most recently is we have this initiative where we have a training program where we build capacity with the community partners to think about how to write impact reports. And so they collect their local data, they get trained on how to put together an impact report. They write their community's impact report, and then Tamarack takes 18 of them. So we have a subset of impact reports, and that gives us the sense of what's going on in the communities and what is impacting them. And then we reflect that back in a loop of learning with them. And we also look at data from other sources. So we bring in other data, and it's that kind of shared measurement approach. But the impact reporting exercises were that training we're doing now more and more with our other communities as well, the Building Youth Futures, the Climate Transitions, and deepening community work. And so helping build capacity for the local community to be able to tell their own impact story is a critical piece of the work that Tamarack has focused on over the last couple of years, and we're continually iterating that. But it's I think it's a really great way of not us telling their story, but them telling their own story and building capacity that way to tell their story. Yeah, but we can, you know, Alex, we can go offline, and I happy to share, you know, some of the tools that we put together around that.
Thank you.
Thank
you
one
so
in
much,
the
Liz.
chat. Sorry, Alex. I popped one in the chat as well. Really good question. And, you know, evaluation can be such a tension-filled kind of space as well, when people are feeling not good enough, for example, some of the time, or worried that they'll be, worried, just generally about a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sensitive area. I'm going to come to Sandra and then to Show, and then we'll come back to you, Tony. So, Sandra, your turn. Tell us what you're thinking.
Good. Sorry, my internet seems to be unstable. That's why I've got my camera off, so I hope I don't drop off. But thank you, Denise. That and thanks, Liz. That was awesome. And all of the good questions that have come before mine were on my list as well. But I guess following on from Alex, sort of keeping it on the agenda, because I've been contracted until August to roll out this government project, which has got crazy timelines. to engage, you know, with the whole community, come up with a vision framework all by August.
What do you think?
Kind of
Are you bored?
keeping it, because
Are you
I'm
bored?
moved on from that project.
What's that?
And so I'm just thinking, you know, keeping it on the agenda and working with these timelines that are imposed from outside organizations with dollars attached, of course.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, right? I'm working right now with a group in Elkhart County, Indiana, on a kindergarten readiness initiative, right? And so we have a 9-month timeline. I'm happy to share with you a little bit of our process. We have a 9-month timeline, and so we have a design team. So this is how I like to work. We have a smaller group who's our design team. We worked through a couple of sessions where we came to a good enough theory of change around kindergarten readiness in Elkhart County. And then when we got to the end of the theory of change question, we were going to then take it out to a bigger community. But they said, no, you know, that a part of our theory of change is that we want parents at the center, parents and children at the center. And so they said, we need to do parent listening sessions first. And so that's kind of, we took a little bit of a pause and we went to community parent listening sessions. Now what we've done, the next thing was, okay, then we've done the parent listening, then we're going to do community engagement. And they said, no, again. They said, no, we now need to talk to practitioners and kindergarten teachers, because if we're going to go to the community, we've got to make sure that we have done our good diligence work before we feel comfortable going to the community. And so it's really interesting, the journeys that communities go on. And I think part of the process that I've reflected on is that it's not about me, really. It's about that community and the community journey, right? And that's what I say to them all the time, because they say, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, you know, no, you are the experts. You're grounded in the community. We have to do the things that you feel are right. I can help you with some of the processes, you know, and some advice, but at the end of the day, it's the community. And as a key stakeholder in the community, you're driving the agenda, and I'm facilitating the process. But that's been such a interesting set of conversations, because the parent listening sessions were so informative and have really kind of changed the way that they think about the theory of change. And I think the practitioner sessions will be equally informative. One of the things you might consider, Sandra, we use this tool a lot at Tamarack when you're engaging community and building a common vision. It's a tool that comes out of the Urban Institute out of the United States called data walks. And data walks are essentially, you put up, let's say you're wanting to move the needle on kindergarten readiness, for example. You might have 5 or 6 pieces of data. And one piece of data, the one that was most important to the folks in Elkhart County, was they asked this question, why, despite our best effort, are only 40% of kids in Elkhart County ready for kindergarten, right? So that's one piece of data. And then you would have 5 other pieces of data. And then you would give people, you would have a community session, and you would put up these data stations and have people interact with those pieces of data. So you're not making the choices for them. They are talking about that data, they're interpreting it, they're sharing their lens and their perspective. It's such a powerful tool when we're doing community change work. So I love data walks.
Great, thank you. And that kind of is my thinking too, that taking lots of people with me, and we're doing lots of interactive collaborative planning, co-designing. So
yeah,
but I'll definitely check out that data walks. Thanks, that's
yeah,
like a tool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome, great questions. Thank you. Sho, what's your question? What are you thinking about?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me this one. Yeah, Liz, and thanks for the presentation. It was Really brilliant presentation. Yeah, especially because I quite like the collective impact model. I've been trying to promote this approach quite a bit, but in some of my projects, like 2 or 3 actually, yeah, because collective impact is ultimately in solving the issue that we were hoping to make. But I guess in some of the New Zealand context, not all of them, but some of the New Zealand context, things are very competitive in many ways. Like, in the homeless sector, housing sector, like people try to one single person, one organization trying to solve the issues without collaborating, coordinating, try to understand how the community is, stuff like that. So I'm just having a really tough time trying to implement this approach to some of the sector. Especially because, for example, I was trying to do in the small island, to try to solve the housing crisis, but because community didn't respond in the way that I was hoping to, because it's not that I can solve it or one single organization can solve it. It's actually the group of communities, the community members who actually need to create a shared vision and then try to achieve the issues. But after kind of literature review, kind of data collection kind of stuff, the committees change their mind, say, oh, we don't need it,
Yeah.
They say no kind of stuff. So it's like, hey, I've done my effort, I've done all my stuff, but now you say no to that kind of stuff. I don't know what to do,
Yeah.
It's not the me trying to solve the issues. It's not the things that I can do it, it's not the PhD or masters that will solve these issues. It's actually the community who will have to come, because in the States, that's the case, yeah, especially in the housing homeless sector. But in some of the community, like small island, it's because of the island mindset. It's like, oh, people from outside island don't want, we don't want people from outside island to come in, that's the mindset.
Yeah.
When I say it's like, I talk to heart, I talk to brains, I talk to the Kania, they're sort of interested, let's do this, and then suddenly the community say no.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Sho. You're absolutely right. It is about mindsets, right? Like you need to have people around the table who are at least willing to collaborate differently and who are impatient with the situation as it currently exists, right? And it's hard to do that. So that readiness continuum, there's a readiness continuum. I'll send Denise a little bit more information about that. It comes out of Harwood Institute out of the US. But the readiness continuum has 5 phases to it. And sometimes that sweet spot is where there is a catalytic group of people that are willing to kind of move something forward. And it sounds to me that like the work, what you're trying to do is probably somewhere else on the continuum. And so it's really thinking about, okay, so before we do collective impact, is there something we might be able to do together to build collaboration muscle that will help us, right? And so it might not be that you bring in a full collective impact approach, but you might say, could we get 3 or 4 organizations together to talk about what we have in common? Maybe clients, maybe the way we deliver our services, maybe there's something shared that we have in common, and think about, okay, could we collaborate together? So it's really, thinking about if you're finding a big amount of resistance, then what are the smaller steps that build readiness to get you to the bigger steps, right? And that's often when I'm supporting a community and they're facing a lot of resistance. That's kind of what I recommend or what I support in terms of the work, is to go a little bit slower in this and just see how many people that you can get on board. The other thing that I think about a lot, and I talk to communities a lot about, is I don't know if you've ever seen the innovation curve, right? But the innovation curve is there are innovators, they're usually 3 to 5%. There are early adopters, they might be, 10%. then you've got your early majority, then you've got your later majority, and then you've got your laggards, right? And sometimes when communities are trying to move the needle, they talk about, or build a big collaborative, they talk about, oh, we need to get Denise at the table, right? And we can't go forward unless Denise is at the table, right? And everything stops because we're waiting for Denise to come. But Denise has a whole bunch of other things on her plate, right? So you want to always stay with those early adopters, those innovators and early adopters, not worry about the laggards in your community. Just, and again, that's a mindset shift, right? Is to go with the people that are most interested in trying to move forward and build from there. And as you continue to build, you just keep building reinforcing loops into this, right? And that's really a critical way of organizing yourselves. So many communities go, okay, we got to get everybody involved, right? Like everybody has to be involved in this discussion. And that's the wrong thing too, right? You go again with your innovators and your early adopters. And so it is about being a bit more strategic and shifting your mindset about how to organize. And the folks around the table continually thinking about, okay, how do we engage them and help them shift their mindsets as well? Because, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, so this is my latest theory. So you can all take this on or not. If we're working in an organization, most organizations are horizontal or hierarchical, right? So they have a board of directors, they have a CEO, they have staff, that kind of thing. So they're often in this kind of a framework, top to bottom. Collaboration is horizontal, right? It's about groups coming together and trying to do consensus and build a common agenda. So we come to these horizontal collaborations with a hierarchical mindset. And so they don't fit. They're two different ways of organizing. And so when you see collaboration stumble, it's because they're trying to put the hierarchical mindset into this horizontal paradigm, right? And so I've been really thinking about that lately and thinking about, okay, so how do we help people think more about the horizontalness of this work and be comfortable with some of that, right? Some of that kind of shared power, shared resources, common agenda piece, as opposed to this hierarchical, somebody at the top makes the decision and we just support it. Yeah, go ahead, Sho.
Yeah, so well, so what happened was, so there is already a collaboration happening in the place. So ultimately, what happened was, so collaboration happened in the local space. So there are already community development projects that's been happening in the housing space in the small island. That's why ultimately they didn't need me. It's like the whole island, they wanted to solve the issue by themselves, not from the outside. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So they said basically you showed up and you wanted to be involved, but they said we don't want you because we're good.
Yeah. They changed their mind halfway through, and I was like, okay, I could probably just write a short report. That's it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like they're already doing other stuff. So I was being part of the committee and the housing Hui kind of stuff. But you know, when I say, hey, you know, this is the kind of project that we could I did presentation, and afterwards they said no.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So I guess I
know. It's like it's like it's already there. So it's like, why am I doing this?
Yeah,
so I sort of kind of wasted my time, effort, and it's like, okay, this is so it's like it's just become the only academic product, you know. It's just my writing project. That's it. Yeah, it has because the community is already doing it, so it's like it has got no meaning to it, you know, in the real, you know, because they're already doing it kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah, and so maybe they're not ready to hear what your contributions can be because they feel comfortable in their sphere with the work that they're doing.
Yeah, but they want who saying that, oh, we are having crisis, we got solve that issues. It's like, okay, then let's get going there. They're like, oh, yeah, we are all good. It's like,
Yeah. So again, I think it's a readiness bit, right? Like, I think they're probably not ready to change. And so then you just need to say, okay, so if they're not ready to hear it, then is this the best use of my time, right? Or what can I learn from this experience, or how can I help? But yeah, sometimes, you know, people are not ready. Then you just, you maybe give them some advice and hope that at some point in the future they'll take it, right?
Yeah,
or not.
That's what I did. So I just made it as a more academic product, and then just, you know, creating for the advocating for UN kind of stuff. And otherwise, just I'm just writing just report, and then that's it. I just say, you know, okay, that's it. That's all the involvement that I have. Goodbye.
I have to tell you, Sho, there's lots of times where I've done things and I've thought it was the best idea in the world ever, and I've pitched it to a funder. And the funder has said, yeah, not the best idea ever. And I would walk away and go, why not? Because I think it's the best idea, right? And then a couple of years later, I'd go, oh, no, that wasn't actually a very good idea. You know, so it's sometimes you're ahead of the curve, your idea, the group isn't ready for, or sometimes, you know, it just, like in my case, with mine, it wasn't a very good, it wasn't a well thought through idea. So the funder was wise at the time not to invest in it.
Sometimes it's about meeting people where they're at too, isn't it? Totally. Seeing what they are up for, and whether you're behind or in front of the curve is kind of irrelevant. Like you said, Liz, it's not actually, doesn't matter what you think, it's actually what they think. They're the ones that have to live it into being. So I'm just going to stop that conversation there, because I know Tony has been waiting to add something as well. And then we'll start to wrap up as we come towards the hour of 3 o'clock for us, at least, and quite late for Liz, and earlier for our Australian. And I don't know what time it is in Nebraska. I'm sorry, Justine. But over to you, Tony. Thanks, Sho.
Thanks very much, Denise. Look, you're on TV. I think you're on TV. Why aren't you on TV? Oh, well, must be a reason. So my question, Liz, is really, you mentioned about conflict, and I'm just wondering how you handle conflict in these sorts of situations. I've got an interest in deep political conflict, and I'm doing a thesis on it. So any help, you see, that's what I'm looking for. But I'm really interested.
Have you read Adam Kahane's book, Collaborating with the Enemy?
Sorry, whose book?
Adam Kahane. He is with Rios Partners, and he wrote a book a number of years ago called Collaborating with the Enemy. So it's a really great book. He talks a lot about, you know, his own challenges in terms of facilitating very, very difficult, often very political collaboration. And he gives some strategies for different ways of facilitating conversations and collaborations when it's a high conflict situations. And so that's the one I would point you to. I think Adam is one of the smartest people, and he just actually published a new book. I don't know if you can't see this. It's called Facilitating Breakthrough. And again, it's another really, really good book about how to remove obstacles, bridge differences, and move forward together. So he's very thoughtful. He's very considered, and he brings his real life experience of facilitating anti-apartheid work in South Africa into the conversation in all of his books. And so I would highly recommend him, Tony, to you.
Yeah, I'll take a look. The thing I am looking at the moment, I've got a friend who lives here who's facilitated conversations between Palestinians and Jewish people in Israel, looking at after Camp David, I think. So she's got some experience of this as well. So it's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, there's a colleague of yours in New Zealand who interviewed. He interviewed me on a podcast, and then he said, who else should I interview? And I said, well, who do you want to talk to? And he said, my dream is to talk to Adam Kahane. And I said, oh, I know Adam. I can connect you to Adam. His podcast is called Beyond Consultation. And he has, if you go to Beyond Consultation, he has a podcast with Adam where he interviews Adam. So yeah, I think his name is Paul. Have you, Paul, he's in the South Island. He lives in the South Island.
Okay. We probably all know him.
You probably all do. Yeah.
Part of Business Lab. I can't think of the people involved.
Yeah, Business Lab,
Lab does that podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't think of his name. I think there's a few people actually, because they did one with Gail Surgener recently as well.
Yeah, he's got some really good guests on, but I was able to connect him to Adam, so you can listen to the podcast, his interview with Adam. So
there's a great webinar from Tamarack with Adam as well. I don't remember when it actually happened, but was that around collaborating with the enemy, I think? So it might have been a few years ago.
It might have been around, what is it? What was that one? No, it was an earlier book by him, Power and Love, I think.
Power and Love. Yeah. Yeah, definitely worth having a look at. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Interesting stuff. Any other thoughts? Ellen, have you got anything sitting there burning? And I know, Jules, you've put some stuff in the chat, but my multitasking is falling out through the window at the moment, so my apologies. Have a look at them. Ellen, any thoughts?
Look, I'm quite interested in the work that Tamarack's done in poverty reduction in Canada, because I know in Australia that it's something that our governments at all levels don't really want to talk about very much. We don't even have the same measurement for what our poverty line is in Australia. So we're guessing, but there's a report that came out from, I was just looking at it earlier on while I was thinking, from an organisation called Bank West Curtin Economic Centre, and they've got our poverty rate in Australia this year at 11.8%, which is incredible, which is really, really quite high. We fit on the higher end of the OECD scale of developed nations. But really interesting work you've done, because to me, working on poverty is a real key to so many other factors. Obviously, we've always known it's a driver for things like crime and things like that. But certainly, it's something that I'd like to see a focus on in my country. So I'm just interested in, I really want to hear more about your work on poverty, really. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. There are some, if you come to our website, there are some really good reports under the Ending Poverty section of the website. It's amazing work, but it really has gained the most momentum when the federal government a number of years ago. Like, we'd been working at the provincial government level for the longest time. That's, not without its both challenges and its opportunities. But when the federal government came on board, that's where we saw the biggest momentum. And the most recent big win is that now all provinces and territories provide families with $10 a day childcare. So that's the newest piece. So every family, now, do we have enough childcare spaces? Probably not. Our childcare, early childhood educators paid the rate that they should be? Probably not. So there's still more work to be done. But right across Canada now, families will have access to $10 a day childcare, and that affordability will have really big impacts for low-income families, for immigrant families, and those children will be better able, they'll be more socialized and better able to enter into the school system more effectively. So it's a big step forward in Canada.
Yeah. I've had a look at a lot of the resources there. It's just really exciting to see the change in that poverty rate. I think that's just an amazing outcome. And obviously, obviously the collective impact work and the work done on reducing poverty, ending poverty. You know, you obviously made an impact there, as well as the other factors that are being in play. I find one of the difficulties that we have in Australia is that our local governments vary from local government to local government, and from state to state, so that in Queensland, our local governments don't have to have any sort of social or community plan that they report on. And then the problem is that the temptation is then that they just go back to looking at roads, rates and rubbish and infrastructure, and not looking at and seeing that the social sphere isn't their game. Even though I just can't understand why it's not, because you build the infrastructure for people, you should be building the community to fit into that infrastructure as well. So that's one of our issues. And then because we have 3 different levels of government, local, state and federal, adds to a complex picture that makes it harder to get social issues onto the agenda at times, especially when you have people from competing parties in state and federal spheres. But I'd be interested to see how we can get it happening here.
I agree with you, Alan, but it's also an opportunity. So what we saw in Canada was we started to pit one province against another. So in your case, one state against another, right? So a state that was leading out, we would then, so Quebec was the first state, then New Brunswick, and then in Ontario, there was a change in government. So we said, look at what Quebec is doing. Look what New Brunswick is doing. Can't you do it too, right? And so then we were able to, so you slowly do that. And even at the local level, you start with the early adopters, right? The innovators and early adopters, those mayors that have that kind of civic conscience or have more pressures on the municipalities, and you use that as leverage, and you start to really gather those stories to then go to your own government and say, hey, they're doing it over here. That's what I did in Hamilton. You know, when our mayor said, oh, we can't talk about poverty, I would say, well, why can't we? They do in Calgary, they do in, you know, St. John, New Brunswick. They're talking about it in St. John's, Newfoundland. Of course we can. What's preventing us from doing that, right? So I think it's, again, it's kind of thinking about who's doing what, and like that's where an organization like Tamarack can be very instrumental, right? Because they can give you that national scope and scale. And I think to some degree in Australia, isn't it Collaboration for Impact that's doing some work around maybe not just poverty, but that is one of the areas that they're focused on in terms of their capacity building work.
I'll look them up.
Okay.
Just out of my own interest until we can get going locally. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I just really want to sort of start to wrap us up. Jules has left a comment for us in the chat as well to consider. But such a great sharing, Liz, some tools and insights and frameworks, philosophies that we can apply in our own context, and they're so principle-based, I guess, that they're not hard and fast. I love the preconditions to really know that a tool is a tool. It's only as good as you use it, and you've got to have the right tool for the job. So collective impact's no magic wand, right? But it leads to so many other things. And even if it's just the thinking that says this is not right for this time or this purpose. So really, really want to thank you for that and all the tools and things that you've shared today. Do a quick around the room as one thing that you're taking away with you, and then I'll do a karakia and close, and we can go to our weekends or get closer to our weekends, depending where you are in the world. Who would like to go first and then pass it on to somebody else? What are you taking away?
I'll jump in. Kylie here from Far North Queensland in Australia. Just wanted to say, Liz, your insights are gold. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight to hear what you've been saying, and also reinforcing to a certain extent what we're doing, which is a good thing, seeing as that we're pretty much embedded in the Tamarack way of things. So to hear from you, you know, reinforcing really some of the things that we're doing was really Terrific. Thank you so much for that. Certainly the extra insights. I'm going to go away and get Adam Cahane's book, if I can track that down. And while we don't particularly have a collaborate with the enemy situation on our hands, Alan's comments around the 3 different levels of government are very close to home for us, because we're about to face a federal election and we're not sure what we're going to end up with. And potentially we will have some of that need to collaborate with the enemy, but we will see. This time will tell. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of today.
Awesome. Thank you, Kylie. I think Adam's stretch collaboration, which is in collaborating for the enemy, might be really useful to look at. Pity about the diagrams, Liz. They're so scratchy. I can never copy them well enough.
Yeah,
First world problem. Kylie, would you like to pass the baton, I guess, to someone else to
Yes,
say?
can we go to Alex, please?
Oh, me? I just froze for a second there. Apologies. Oh, Liz, that was so fantastic. Look, there's a number of things I've got from this. First, the offer to help out. That's just gorgeous. Thank you so much. The tools and so on. I'm going to have a bit, right now, I'm going to go and have a look at that, which is just fantastic. But also just, I guess it's just the energizing, it's so refreshing to talk with somebody who's grappling with the stuff that we're grappling with too, I guess. So yeah, I can't even say, actually, just a massive thanks from me, and yeah, good luck and keep up the good work, I guess, as well. Thank you, Liz.
You're very welcome.
Pastor Rako. Alex, who would you like to hear from next? Insights, thoughts?
Jules is probably still on silent, I think. Alan?
Me? Yeah, look, I found that to be really fantastic, because I've always been quite interested in what Tamarack's done. From when I first saw Paul Bourne speak via video at a conference that Peter Kenyon pulled together in Melbourne a few years ago. Oh, more than a few years ago now. It was just great, and just really good to see the work, and really good to hear you talk, because it's the runs on the board for Tamarack and in Collective Impact are fantastic. Also, the resources you've just given me, like we're looking them up, the Beyond Consultation podcast, and I'm looking for that. I'm looking at that Collaboration for Impact website in Australia. That looks fantastic. So thanks for the great resources. It's really good. It's been great today.
Okay, thank you.
I pass? I will pass to Show. Show's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks so much, and yeah, much appreciated, especially because Tamarack Institute and what materials has been very useful, actually. Yeah, I really appreciate all the resource materials right there from you guys. Actually, yeah, I guess it's just for some community or some people are not quite ready to take on the kind of new things. Yeah, that's my personality, actually. Because even though I really utilize some of the skills and materials to actually try to address some of the complex issues like housing kind of stuff, but yeah, sometimes I'm not the right person to do that kind of stuff,
Or the group might not be ready. I think Denise's words were very wise, right? That we always have to pay attention to where the group is and walk alongside them with their readiness. Yeah.
Yeah, especially this kind of Asian or Japanese guy who's trying to do something kind of stuff, in place like New Zealand, yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your presentation on the materials, because I really value your stuff. We'll be in touch. Yeah.
Oh, great! Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. And I think Sandra, you might be, and Jules, tell us your last thoughts.
Like everybody else, thank you so much, Liz, for sharing the tools and resources. Always really useful, and I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to share stories talk about issues and solutions collectively. I think that's always a great thing as a learning practitioner. Always learning, love these opportunities to discuss and get together. So, and like everyone else, Tamarack is my go-to for resources, tools, inspiration, thought leadership. So keep up the good work. It's it's fantastic that we've got that tool at our fingertips. And thank you, Denise, for organising this.
One of the things that we're working on right now, which I'm kind of excited about because we've been in a process of engaging advisors and everything, is how to build sustainable and resilient collaboratives. So we're putting together a 10 guide, which is 10 good ideas, 10 stories, 10 resources, or 10 factors of sustainability, 10, everything is 10, right? And 10 pieces of advice for funders. And we had a number of funders who were part of our advisory group. So that hopefully will be out sometime, in the summer. So for our summer, your winter.
Look forward to it.
Denise, before you and Jules, thank you for all your comments in the chat box, and particularly the ones about coming out of the post-pandemic world that we're coming out of, because I think, one of the things I've been reflecting on quite a bit as we re-engage with community is that it is going to be different, and we are maybe going to have to go slower and be more patient, because we've spent 2 years in a different kind of world and mindset. And so slowing down, re-engaging, recognizing that people are still fearful, that people are tired, that people don't know what the future holds, all of those things as facilitators, we have to pay attention to. And it can't be to push hard. It's really to push at the pace that people are ready to be moving forward with. And I think, I've had a number of conversations recently about all of that. And for me, it's like, slow down and breathe is really my mantra for the next 6 months at least.
Absolutely. And Jules, invite you to put any words you would like into the chat for us. And I totally echo that, as I said before. The big thing, actually, lots of things I got out of today, but a lovely reminder of good enough. What's good enough here? That I'd often say that anyway, but it's one thing to think about it in the context of the projects we're working on or with, and quite another to apply it to our own spaces, just being honest. So that was a lovely little check for me, is what's good enough and how do we work at that pace, especially I think in this emerging, everything's always emerging, the pandemic, the post-pandemic, whatever is we're in. And of course there's climate change and poverty is pervasive, lots of slow burn crises, if you like, as well. So what is good enough here? What can we do now for this has been a real takeout for me from this with Collective Impact. So thank you everybody for your time and your wonderful kōrero, your conversation, your questions, your openness to listening, to Liz and also to each other. Really appreciate it. Lovely thing to do on a Friday. I'm going to close us with just a little, probably a karakia you've heard before, partly because I know one of the ones that I know better. So if we just take a moment to have a little peace, to go slow and to think about the weekend ahead, the week that's just been. Kia hora, te marino, kia whakapapa, haunamu, te moana, he huarahi mā tātou e te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou i a tātou katoa, huie, tai kie. And that's essentially, as most of you, or New Zealanders may well know, may the peace be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone or shine like greenstone. May a pathway for us all this day let us show respect for each other, for one another, and bind us together, not in a bound kind of way, but in a collaborative way. Although I did also like that idea of a bit of competition there, Liz. That was also important to keep a bit of mix, a bit of friction, perhaps. Thank you, everybody. Go well. See you later.
Kaki te.
Ngā te wā.